Welcome to the Christy-Faith Show, the show where we explore ideas, strategies, and tools to empower your homeschooling journey. Today, we're tackling a topic that's more important than ever in our fast-paced, tech-driven world: how to foster critical thinking in our homeschools. Studies show a troubling decline in critical thinking skills. For example, researchers found that increased reliance on AI tools correlates with a significant drop in the ability to evaluate information and solve problems critically. Younger generations in particular are experiencing cognitive offloading, where they depend on technology instead of sharpening their own mental muscles. What is the cost of this, and what can we do about it? I knew just who to invite on today's episode to discuss this. Our guest, Renton Rathbun, has been at the forefront of teaching logic and critical thinking for over 25 years, including 15 years dedicated specifically to the subject that we're talking about today. Renton has witnessed firsthand the challenges educators and families face in cultivating critical thought, and he's raising the alarm about how emerging technologies like AI are further complicating the issue. He's a homeschooling dad himself, has more advanced degrees than I can even list, and a world-class speaker on the topics of critical thinking, culture, and worldview. Today, Renton will share with us some of his insights into how we as parents can address these challenges head on, from practical techniques to philosophical frameworks that will instill lifelong learning habits of discernment and inquiry in our kids. This is going to be a great show. Welcome, Renton. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this.
Yes. Well, I want to start out today. Can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to focus on critical thinking in education, particularly with homeschooling?
Yeah. So from a series of unfortunate events, I became a professor. And it really was. That was not on my field of vision. The Lord kind of just made it happen. And so I ended up being a professor at a college. That led me to some degrees that I got that ended up leading me to teach logic in college. And for 15 years of my teaching background, I taught at a public college, community college, and some public universities. Ethics was another one that I taught. And on the first day of ethics, I would ask the students this question. I would say, is it wrong to murder? And you would be so proud of the public school system because almost everyone agreed that it was wrong. So that was my first question to them. But then my second question was then, what makes it wrong to murder? And it was that question that I got a lot of silence. They didn't know why it was wrong to murder. And I would push and say, surely you think it's wrong, so what makes it wrong? You know, kids would say, well, maybe it's the law. And I would like, well, you know, is the law the only thing keeping you from murdering? And so, you know, we would have these conversations and they just could not get there. Now, you might think that this is an issue of, you know, some ethical issue, but what I discovered was that this was an issue of critical thinking. The students knew the right answer because they had been brought up in an educational system that whether you go to a public school or a private school or a Christian school, whatever it is, they are addicted in those schools to a standardized testing format. And when you go to standardized testing, having the right answer made you smart. I mean, that's what the kids thought. They thought they were smart because they were regurgitating what they learned. And so this regurgitation of data was what they were coming from, and they weren't ready for a question about how things actually happen or how something could be possible and how you explain those kind of things. And so as I continued my work in getting more degrees, I got my degree in philosophy and then in what was called apologetics, both concentrating on this big word called epistemology, which is a big word that just means, how do we come to know something? That is what fascinated me because I knew everyone had opinions and everyone had beliefs, but my question was, how do we have a belief? Where does that come from? And how do we trace that back? And so that's what my study was. And so that became my passion. And then when we started homeschooling, I really felt the incredible pressure of bringing in a generation that knows how to think. I just believe that there are so many people that are passing on, and we don't have a generation to replace them who knows how to think. And I think it's the best place we're going to find those kind of kids are in homeschool families.
It's really funny because we're often accused of indoctrinating our kids. And I laugh at that so much because homeschooling, particularly the classical movement, although it's not just the classical movement because it's something that you and I care very much about as well, we're kind of the forerunners of bringing that back, right? From the ancients. It's really fascinating that it's the homeschooling movement where we're giving our kids formal logic, for example, but we have to define terms. So would you please define for all of us what is critical thinking, and then follow up, and I'll remind you if you forget the second question, why is it such a vital skill for our kiddos to develop?
So critical thinking is a term that a lot of people like to use, but no one that I have met really understood what it meant. And so even on the college level, we'd have these faculty meetings where they would bring all the faculty into a room and they would rent some guy to come in and tell us that we need critical thinking in our classrooms. And he would go on and on about how important critical thinking is and how if we don't do it, we're not really teaching. Just, huge guilt trip, all that stuff. However, he never told us what it was. And that's the big secret. Even all the way to grad school, everyone is talking about this. No one knows what it means, but we don't, admit it because we're afraid that if we don't know what it means, then we're not really doing it. And I think that's really what's happening, especially when it comes to what's going on in America today and the educational system. But this is what I would say critical thinking is. Critical thinking is having a strategy for thinking. Now, I know that sounds kind of basic, but I want you to think about it this way. If you go to the gym, and, people go to the gym for lots of different reasons. But if you go to the gym, if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a strategy, you end up just using the different machines that are around. Maybe you'll start running on a treadmill for a little while, jump over to the free weights, try and lift something, put it down, get on one of those weird machines and try and do something with the weird machine. And if you just keep on doing it randomly, you have no idea what's really helping you. And so if you find it's easier to pick up, your kids, and you're like, well, what caused that? What machine should I be using that helped me pick up my kid easier? What I find is a lot of people think this way. People's thinking is so random. They don't have any discipline behind their thinking. They don't have a strategy behind their thinking. They think thinking is something that just happens. And just like the gym, you've got to have a goal so you know what machines to use and what strategy to use. Do I want to lose weight? Do I want to gain weight? Do I want to work on my heart? Do I want to work on my muscle? Whatever that is, whatever that goal is, that's going to dictate the strategy. So critical thinking is when I have a strategy for thinking based on a goal for my thinking. We have to ask ourselves when we're doing critical thinking, what's my goal? What's the best way to get there? And then what's a pattern I can keep using or a discipline I can keep going back to day to day to get back to that way that I thought was best to get to my goal. And I think this is helpful for homeschoolers because they have a huge advantage. They are not stuck in a system that relies on standardized testing. Yes, in homeschool, we do have standardized testing, to make the government happy or whatever. But in the end, we have teachers that know their students better than anybody else in the world when you homeschool. And when you homeschool, you are able to grasp not just the way your student thinks, but you understand the student so you can help them get to that goal. And so the real question is, when we think about critical thinking as being a strategy for thinking to accomplish my goal, our biggest question then is, what is my goal for thinking? Part of your question was, why is it so important for our homeschool families to do this? And this is why I think it's important. I want you to think about all the great men just in the past 100 years and great women that have died and have passed away. I mean, you think about, Winston Churchill, you think about great people that have done these great things because when the time came and it really mattered, they had the thinking that came through. And I ask myself all the time, even people that aren't famous, there was a man that did not have to, but he decided to invest in me. He was an older man. His name was Dr. Robert Forney. He was a medical doctor and had, a PhD on top of that. Just this crazy, man who was super important in this world. And he decided to meet with me on a regular basis to teach me what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a thinker. And he just decided to do that. About 2 years ago, he died of brain cancer. And it bothered me, not just his passing, but who is going to be the next Robert Forney. And when I look at my children, and when you look at your children, we should be thinking about all the great people that have passed away that need to be replaced. And are our children going to be the people that are good thinkers at the right time to do something quite extraordinary when it needs to be done? And I think that's why we need good thinkers.
And from the sounds of it, there's a couple things that I heard, and I do want you to go into that goal. But one thing I heard is that this is a skill set that needs to be trained. And often when I think about critical thinking, and maybe this is just rudimentary, but I often think of if I am arming my kids and pouring into them and teaching them how to think critically, it's almost a shield, and it's a shield and a guide in navigating life. I consider people who cannot think critically to be extremely vulnerable, easily manipulated, making decisions based on emotion, which we know all those things are relatively dangerous. Just look at the fights on the internet over politics, right? When no one really knows anything. But I do want to circle back to what is the goal then? That's really fascinating.
So when we're thinking about a goal of thinking, what we need is some kind of way or picture that will help us think about this. So if you think of a tether ball, do you remember tether balls?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes,
so
I'm a tall girl. I dominated.
That's right. Well, some of your younger listeners.
I beat all the boys on the playground in tetherball just because I towered over them. No other reason than that.
That was the great advantage, wasn't it? There's nothing you could do. If you were short, didn't matter. You were done. So your younger listeners may not know what tetherball is because it's an old person's thing. But if you don't know what it is, it's this big pole that you cement into the ground. Then you have this rope that's tied, to a ball, which is really weird because it's really hard to tie ropes to balls. So they had to create a special ball for the rope. Anyway, tetherball. So the point is you hit the ball. The ball's the most, interesting part about the whole thing. You're hitting the ball, it wraps around the pole. If you think of the most interesting part about tetherball is that, bright, usually yellow ball. That's usually what our beliefs are. They're like that bright, shiny thing that everyone can see. It's what we plaster all over the internet. It's what we tout when we talk to our friends. I have beliefs, and I'm passionate when we're passionate, all that sort of thing. Usually we're passionate about our beliefs, the ball part, because we believe they're true. Mm-hmm. You can think of the pole as something that doesn't move. We can think of that as truth. When I'm sure about my belief, I believe it's grounded in truth. And so that's why I can be passionate. That's why I can guilt other people into believing my beliefs, because I think it applies to everybody, because it's grounded. It's true. So if you can imagine the pole then is truth itself, grounded. No matter what happens, that stays there. The ball might fly around, but it's grounded. Now, the question is, how do I tie my belief, the ball, back to truth? Well, I need a rope. Now, that rope is what we call justification. How do I justify my beliefs? In other words, it's not just that I think my belief is true. How do I help you, walk you through why I think it's true? So if you think of the tetherball model, the goal of the tetherball model, when I'm talking about a belief, is tracing my belief back to a source that tells me my belief is true. So if I have a strategy for critical thinking that I want to trace back beliefs, whether it's someone else's belief or my own belief, I want to trace that back to how I know it's true, then my goal then is has to involve, well, what is the source of truth so that I can use to know what's true? And then what is the appropriate steps I need to take to show that my belief, the ball, goes back to that truth? It's tied there. There's something that binds it to that truth. And so oftentimes, I use, for my students, I help them by thinking of it this way. When you're reading Romeo and Juliet, everyone knows that story, and that, Romeo meets a girl on, and the first night they meet, they fall in love, and it's all about falling in love. And Romeo, as teenagers are wont to do, as they fall in love, on the first night they meet, Romeo asks her to marry him. And of course, the next day they marry each other, and everything's fine until, of course, they die at the end. So sorry for your listeners that may not have seen Romeo and Juliet yet, but that's a spoiler. You can delete that later. But Romeo and Juliet's all about love. So what is love? Did Romeo really love Juliet? I mean, it's a good question for the story. It's a good question for life. It's why we read Romeo and Juliet. It's why it's part of literature. It's part of Western civilization. And so what is love? Once we start defining that term, we need to know if we're right about how we defined it. Well, how do I know if I'm right? How do I know that the definition I used for love goes back to some kind of source that tells me whether it's true or not? And this is important because you had a court that decided on gay marriage, and the Supreme Court, even I think it was Kennedy, admitted that he made the choice he made about gay marriage based on love, and that love is love. And so if someone loves someone else, then we shouldn't regulate whether they can marry them or not. They should be allowed. But it's all based on that word. And if you read his comments, what you find is he never defined what love is to decide if that's what's really happening. And so we see love as being this subjective thing, so we have to define it. And if I define it, I need to show you how I walk back to a source that tells me I'm right. That's what that is. And then we can go back to Romeo and Juliet and find out, no, indeed, they were definitely not in love, because teenagers don't know what that means. So our goal, I think, when it comes to critical thinking is always, how do I trace my belief back to my source of truth?
As a homeschool mom who values a family together approach and leans towards the classical and Charlotte Mason styles, I often struggle to bring my educational vision to life with my kids' diverse ages and learning needs. With all our interests and super packed schedule, bridging that gap between the dreamy homeschool I want and reality, I gotta be honest, it's a challenge. Now, yes, I know perfection isn't the goal, but if you're listening and you could use a little easing of your mental load in your day-to-day, I found a resource that has become the quiet hero of our routine, and it could be a really great option for you too. BJUPress Homeschool Curriculum. Now, many think that BJUPress Homeschool is solely an all-in-one option, and though it does excel in that role, did you know you can also opt for specific courses and tailor them to fit your family's needs, just as I have? BJUPress Homeschool provides the perfect balance of structure and flexibility and easily complements my family's mixed age, family together on the couch learning style. They are second to none in integrating a biblical worldview, stimulating critical thinking, and offering tons of hands-on activities in the lessons. To find out how BJUPress Homeschool can come alongside you in your homeschooling goals too, visit bjupresshomeschool.com or click the link in the show notes. Struggling to find engaging, high-quality classes that fit your child's learning needs and your busy schedule? Look no further than OutSchool, an incredible online resource perfect for homeschoolers. From arts, music, and languages to STEM topics like robotics and coding, OutSchool has something for every learner. Not only do they offer exciting electives, but they also provide, wait for it, academic courses. Yes, even advanced ones. It's been a secret weapon of mine for giving my kids a well-rounded, fun, and engaging education. Use code Christy-Faith at checkout to get $20 off your child's first class or tutoring session. That's outschool.com, code Christy-Faith to get started. Which it's a problem if you don't believe in absolute truth.
Correct. Now, there are ways around that I learned very quickly in my philosophy classes when I was getting my degree in it, that there is a view that says, I may not know absolute truth, but I do know what I feel.
Right.
And kind of like what you were talking about before, that you have people that have come to stop thinking and they are now just moving to being sure about what they feel. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was looked down upon. You shouldn't just do what you feel, you should be thinking. And we talked about that way back then. But today is different, because today, making choices based on how you feel has been legitimized. And because it has become legitimized, people are no longer embarrassed to say, well, if this is how I feel, it doesn't matter. If you can come up with a better argument, you can't argue with how I feel. And in that, legitimizing that idea, we have ruined millions of people and how they've decided they're going to think, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. And the thing about the feeling piece is just how dangerous that is. I mean, it doesn't take long to be in regular therapy, going to, weekly therapy sessions for your therapist to tell you that your feelings don't define you. And if it's a Christian therapist, that our feelings are what God gives us, and they're indicators, they're tools, they're things like that, but they can be very deceiving, right? And so I find that fascinating. I want to ask you, because I think it is helpful when we're trying to understand concepts that are a little bit abstract, to also talk about what they are not. So, for example, in a simple way, when I was a teacher in the classroom, we had to fulfill a critical thinking requirement in our lessons, right? And so often, people don't know this, but teachers are reading scripts too. Like, for all those moms that are insecure about their homeschooling, the teachers are reading scripts too the night before they're teaching the lessons. And it'll say like critical thinking component. And more often than not, it was compare and contrast. Yes. And then you just check the box. We covered critical thinking. So could you define for us, in a more robust way than that, what is it not? Because here's why. We are all about empowering homeschool moms and building their skills. And every website she goes to is going to claim that this curriculum, this is curriculum buying season right now. We're filming this in spring. You might be watching this at a different time of the year. But when you go and shop for curriculum, it will probably say, we foster critical thinking. And some do. Like, I know you and I both love BJUPress Homeschool because it actually does do that. So, but what about the stuff that isn't really critical thinking? Can you talk about what it is not?
So one way of thinking about this is that the best curriculum can do for you is give you an opportunity to do critical thinking. And some of those opportunities are like what you said, like compare and contrast. And you have all these words, formulate, evaluate, and you're like, ooh, that sounds good. We've got to be doing it now, because
the fall of the Roman Empire, like a 12-year-old can figure it out, can solve the puzzle.
Yeah, so we have to get our quote in about talking about the Roman Empire.
Of course.
So don't be fooled that merely accomplishing an objective in some kind of curriculum that says, evaluate the following or whatever, is actually doing the critical thinking. Do not be comforted by the idea that because my child has memorized an incredible, body of knowledge, and they're able to regurgitate that now, they're really hitting critical thinking hard. If we start thinking that those verbs, analyze, identify, evaluate, formulate, that's real critical thinking. And let me tell you something. This is what I used to do as a teacher. I used to be guilty of this all the time. I would think my students are doing critical thinking because I did the critical thinking. So what I would do is I would prepare my lesson, and I would go through the steps of how I do critical thinking. I would then make them memorize the steps that I took and the conclusions that I came to. And then when they were able to regurgitate the steps I took and the conclusions I came to, I thought, man, those kids are good. And they're coming to the same conclusion I'm coming to. And look at those steps. They went right through the right step. I'm an amazing teacher. And I did this for years. I mean, years. And this happens all over in academia. please do not think that because people have degrees or they went to college or something that they have reached some pinnacle of thought.
Oh, no. Let me tell you. Yeah. When I meet some of these, yeah. Well, my whole working career was A-listers, billionaires, entertainment, but also like hedge fund managers. And I'd be sitting across the table and I'm like, you're running this company? I'd be thinking to myself, yeah. So yeah, don't assume just because someone has, like, even if they've graduated from an Ivy League school, that they're somehow more intelligent. I mean, more privileged maybe, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, what you find is that you have these people that are able to do these, are able to talk in a sophisticated way.
Yeah.
And this is what I'd tell your listeners. There is a difference between being sophisticated and being a critical thinker. There are terms and little secrets to be able to talk in a certain way that sounds very sophisticated, but they still haven't done any thinking yet. It sounds like they've done thinking, but they haven't. And so critical thinking is not memorizing a bunch of go-to words. Critical thinking is not merely walking through the steps of these special verbs that we go through to make sure they're getting their objectives done and so that they get a good grade on the test. Critical thinking has got to begin with mom and dad who have a goal for their kid. Mm. They have to have a goal. And this goal has to be this unifying idea that no matter what subject you go to, whether you're doing social studies, history, languages, whatever it is, that you have this little paradigm, this little pattern that you can always go back to and say, okay, here's a belief. We're learning about politics today in social studies, and this president from such and such a time believed this. What do you think about that belief? And, is it true? Well, how would we know it's true? And what steps can we take to decide if it's true based on the source that we know is true? And that leads us, of course, to another question. What's the source of truth? Which, of course, we can talk about as we go.
Yes. So I have to ask you, though, let's talk about, maybe this is self-indulgent, but I want to talk about confirmation bias, as you were using that analogy with the tether ball, and the ball is our belief. And I am guilty of this too. I know particularly in my study of apologetics, where I didn't want to leave my faith. I've had two main faith crises in my life where I almost walked away. Yeah. And I turned to apologetics for help. And particularly in the inerrancy of Scripture. And can I believe the Bible to be true? Because if it is true, then I have to believe what the Bible says, right? And so that's kind of, but, there is this human tendency to look for the things that will confirm our bias, right? So how does that fit into this conversation? Confirmation bias.
Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent question, because we are, as humans, you are always trying to find certainty in the way that culture has taught you to find certainty. And so I think confirmation bias really comes from a buying into what the culture has taught us to come to believe something. So if you think of the word certainty, oftentimes we think of truth, but rarely does certainty have anything to do with truth at all. The world has taught us, our culture has taught us that you can be certain of something when you are able to find something that relates to you, and something then also that is physical, because the supernatural is too hard to believe. We can't deal with that. So it has to be something physical, something that relates to you. And if you find that, your certainty will then create this psychological feeling of satisfaction. And when you have that psychological feeling of satisfaction, you have achieved certainty. And so when we are in doubt of something, or we are struggling with something, oftentimes we are looking for something that relates to us and that is physical in this world. And that's what we've been taught. That's what we believe is going to bring that psychological feeling of satisfaction. But that's just a belief. Should certainty come about through something physical that relates back to me and my personal experiences? Where would we know whether that's true or not? It certainly satisfies us. I mean, when you think of Tom Cruise, who, by the way, is credible. I mean, he does his own stunts. Whenever I bring up Tom Cruise, everyone thinks I'm joking, but I love Tom Cruise. And, if you can arrange just a short meeting, I would just really appreciate it. Anyway, Tom Cruise, man. But he's also a Scientologist. And Scientology, it's a real hard sell. It's, you'd have to believe in a guy on another planet named Xenu who was really displeased with some of his people, and he cryogenically froze them and sent them away, and they crashed on Earth and incinerated, but their bad feelings kind of escaped and get into us and makes us have bad feelings. Anyway, it's a hard sell. But he seems to be pretty certain about it. And when you really look at it, there's people that have opposing views everywhere that are very certain about it. You may not agree with certain politicians, but they're certain about it. And so is certainty really the psychological satisfaction I get from something that related to me that has something, tied to the physical world? Now, my source of truth would say, no, that's not what certainty is. I think it could create a lot of confirmation bias for sure, because everyone's looking for that same pattern to give them some feeling of satisfaction. But I would say real certainty has very little to do with my psychological satisfaction and a whole lot to do with how I have come from belief and stepped towards something that I have put my real faith in, which we all have, whether you're an atheist, agnostic, or religious. We all have to have faith in that source that has told us there is truths. For some people, it's going to be this physical world. For other people, it's going to be supernatural. And so, if you don't know that goal, if you don't have that goal, I have to trace my beliefs back to what's true, and I need a source of truth. Then you can get caught up in confirmation bias in a second, because you'll just default to the culture.
Oh, 1,000%. I remember when I was first a younger mom, I had my kids in Awana. Okay. Are you ready for this?
Yes, I am ready.
And boy, I loved it. I thought I was a great mom. I was volunteering at Awana. The kids are memorizing all these verses, and I volunteered with the leaders, like the junior high and high school leaders. So my kids were in the kids program, and I was volunteering, and it was great. No shade. It was good community. It got us to the church midweek. It fostered friendships, a lot of great things, and you had the car derby. It was a great building, right, social experience. So anyway, we left that church, whatever, haven't been in Awana for a while. A friend told me that there was an Awana program literally 5 minutes from my house that was apparently booming. And it's on a certain weeknight that really worked for us. And so I was like, kids, what do you think? So-and-so's going and this person's going. What do you think about this? And they're like, yeah, let's try it. One thing about my kids that I love is we've definitely created a culture of trying. Like, we try things. We try new foods. It's just a value Scott and I have. So they're game for a lot of things. And then we evaluate afterwards. Okay. So we go there, and they were low on volunteers. And so they asked me to stay. Apparently this is a booming program right now. And a lot of newcomers came that week, and I'm sitting there, and it's the same book from 7 years ago, same everything. And the kids are reciting their verses, and they're getting their badges and marks and stars. And the whole time, right? Cause I have learned so much, and I have studied so much about human psychology. And boy, have I made a turnaround. I'm sitting there going, this is Skinner behaviorism. This is Skinner behaviorism. I can't take this. And I'm just like, they're just reciting the verses to get the awards. And we left, and my kids are like, we hated it. Don't make us go back. And I was like, kids, I can't go back. But my point is, I was so turned off. And the level of convincing I had that Awana was this amazing thing 7 years ago, I mean, you could not change my mind. My kids are going to be Christians forever. They're going to have scripture in their heart forever, which, by the way, they don't. They forget it. Like, that was something the junior high and high schoolers, they would talk about. they were sweet, and they would come to us leaders and say, I went through the whole Awana program and I can't remember anything. How can we help? They were sweet high schoolers. Like, how can we help the kids actually remember this stuff? I don't remember any of it. And I was, the big award winner. Anyway, and to talk about that, the satisfaction that you were referring to earlier, I was so satisfied in that we were participating in this. I thought I was doing the best thing for my kids, and look at the studies, the kids who go through Awana maintain their faith through life and all this stuff. And then I was just like, just feels like surface level performance. Are these kids going to remember these scriptures? Do they even know what these scriptures mean? And no shade, honestly, those volunteers are sweet people, but I'm going to publicly say, I think a little bit of the mark is being missed there. So my point is this convincing? And I got to tell you, in listening to you talk about like truth, where does this come from? How can we know what's true? I find it really depressing, because how much can I not trust my own thinking? When I just look at that one example, how 7 years ago I believed this so strongly with all my heart, and now I'm almost as passionately against it, right? For my own family. And I find that really scary, Renton. So can we turn this into a therapy session right now?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, I find it really scary. And as a Christian, with dealing with all these attacks and what can we trust, and can we trust our critical thinking to arrive at truth, all this. So with that hot mess, now it's your turn.
Well, I would say this. There was a reformer back during the Reformation, during the Renaissance time, that said this: our hearts are idol factories. And
dude,
yeah, we just want to make an idol out of everything. And
we do.
There was this famous writer who ended up committing suicide. He was an atheist. He was one of those writers that had three names, something Wallace or something. Anyway, he was giving this commencement speech, and he, as an atheist, said, "We are all worshipers. It's not a matter of whether you're going to worship. It just matters what you're going to worship." And that is really true. Mm-hmm. We, even, whether you believe in God, the Bible, Christianity, or whatever it is you're holding to, your heart is still going to want to make an idol out of something other than your God. Mm-hmm. And so you might fall at the idol of feeling secure and having that sense of security, and watching your kid, recite a verse. Let me tell you something. That's something we all struggle with, because I have a 24-year-old son, and I have a 9 and a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And so we've seen, we've gone through the teenage years. We've gone through the big rebellion. He's fine. He's a good kid. In fact, I'm going to have supper with him tonight. He's married. But the fear you get especially when they start hitting those double digits, and the rebellion that comes out of them just scares you to death, because you think they're going to walk away. They're going to walk away. And you start making an idol out of what gives you comfort. Watching them say a verse gives you comfort. Watching them, go to church and be halfway happy. And, and that's why, even where you decide to send your kid to church, is it based on what will really help them? Or is it based on, this is a church that my kids really like, and I want them to like church? And so whatever it takes, even if the youth pastor, has to swallow a fish and, during Sunday school to make the kids entertained, whatever he has to do, as long as they like it, it makes me feel better. And so, if that's one of our idols, we have to deal with that, lest we start worshiping our comfort instead of what's best for our kids.
Yeah. And I think we all fall for it, because you're right. That's just where we go as humans, and really just to replace the one thing that will actually fulfill our hearts, which is really powerful. And by the way, a disclaimer, we do memory work in my homeschool. I don't know if you know that. I am a believer in memory work, and we memorize scripture, but we memorize passages and we take it really slow and we talk about what they mean. They're not I kind of moved away from the snippets of because it got to the point where it's like, wait, which Romans verse is this? Because it's all like snippets of sound bites all floating. So anyway, now before we conclude, let me ask you this. What can we do as homeschooling parents? You mentioned a couple times in this episode of having a framework. I do know that you are going to do a masterclass in Thrive where you are going to give us a framework for fostering critical thinking in our kids. But for this episode today, what are a couple takeaways that maybe are really not only relatable, but also doable, tangible takeaways that maybe a parent could implement right now after listening?
First of all, you have to know what joins all your subjects together. So you have you have math, you have social studies, you have history, you have English, writing, all these subjects. This is what frustrates kids. They think each subject is its own world, and they have to enter a new world and try and learn new rules for that big world that you've just created. And now, math is a different world, and I got to have different rules for math. What really helps kids learn is knowing that there is a source of truth by which all these subjects are jetting out of, that they find their, if I can put it this way, their rope is tied to this pole. So what is that pole? And, in our family, the pole is God's word, the Bible. Now, other people will say, well, we don't use that pole. But if you don't have a pole, if you don't have, this is my source of truth, then you have no way to unite all those things together. So the first thing I would say is, do you have a source of truth? Whatever that is, you need to be able to see that it connects to all your subjects. If it connects to all your subjects, then you can ask questions that help them get to the pole. That's your goal. Get them to the pole. You want to start with what questions? So what questions say, what do you believe about this subject? And so that can be everything from, whether it's literature, and you're doing Romeo and Juliet, or you are doing, and saying, what do you believe about love or whatever that is, or math, what do you think math, does math tell us the absolute truth of the world, or is math just a model that we use? Whatever it is, you're asking them what questions about what they believe about the subject. You got to get to that. Then you ask how questions. How do you know this is true? Or how do you know this is possible? When we're doing science, we're predicting things. Why do you think you can predict things? How is it possible that you're able to predict based on these, the things that your book is telling you to do? Where do we get that idea? And those how questions then get us to the where questions. Where do we get the idea that we're right about X, or X is true? So having a what question to know what they believe, a how question to bring them to a place where they're tracing that belief to a source of truth, and then where questions to ask ourselves questions about our source. Those three things are very important. If you don't have that, you're going to be like someone at a gym that's just grabbing different weights or grabbing different machines and just seeing what works, and you'll never know what is really helping your kid.
Yes. So those are really powerful, those particular questions. Now, I have to ask you this as a follow-up. Something that bothered me when I was in the education sector, I guess I still am, I'm just, in a different one now, is when they would ask kids opinions when it's like, you don't know enough to have an opinion. Like, I was just, how do you feel about this particular war or whatever? And it's like, they're 6. You're right. And I'm a trained historian. And when you study historiography and like zeitgeists and eras, you actually, it's pretty depressing because you actually know that none of us actually know what happened ever.
Right.
So then you kind of like, so then what's the point of history? Well, my belief is that the point of history is for us to be changed, and that this is going to come up. My listeners are going to think I'm crazy. I've said this in Thrive before. So then the truth doesn't necessarily matter when we're studying history, okay? Because we're not arriving at it anyway. I mean, there's some factual things that we can say actually happened, but when we're surmising people's motivations or things like that, there is no way. We honestly do not know what a lot of history that we study. And so we have to kind of change the conversation. So then why are we studying it in the first place? So how do you balance that? Because I really don't care what my 6-year-old has to say about the Prussian War. Like, she doesn't know. Before we continue, I want to share with you a program that's been a game changer for our homeschool. At our center, we instructed and helped kids through pretty much every math program on the market and know firsthand just how important a solid math foundation is for our kids' futures. As a career educator with high standards, finding the right program that checked all the boxes felt like too tall of an order until one day I tried CTC Math. CTC Math is an online math curriculum for K-12 students with motivating, interactive lessons that allow kids to learn at their own pace. It does all the teaching and grading so you don't have to, and their adaptive lessons adjust so your child is progressing confidently. With CTC Math, your child is getting a top-notch education and you just made your homeschool life easier. Visit ctcmath.com to start your free trial today, or click the link in the show notes. I've got some news. There's a new reading curriculum that ditches workbooks and drills for fun and games. If you're thinking fun and games sounds a little too good to be true, it's not. 98% of children improved their reading test scores in just 6 weeks with the Reading Skill Set by Love Every. It's a phonics-based program that follows the science of reading, but makes learning to read fun, motivating, and confidence boosting, because it happens by playing games and then practicing with just right skill level books. Kids love it and parent educators love it. And it works. Visit loveevery.com/Christy-Faith today and use code Christy10 to get 10% off your purchase of the Reading Skill Set by Love Every. That's loveevery.com/Christy-Faith.
Well, this is where I think classical people really have caught on to something. What you might be tempted to do is try and do everything all the time, no matter what their age is. I would not try and take them through the process of, what do you believe about this? How do you know? And what's our source of truth to a 6-year-old? But I would meet them where they are. And so,
love this. Yes.
So, and a lot of times a 6-year-old does know how to memorize things. And so use that, you can memorize facts, which is great. Later on, we're going to move, down to other questions, but you might, right now you might be, and this is why catechism was so important during the Reformation. You had Catholics that were saying we have to have these catechisms so people can remember things. But then you had Martin Luther, who was the first to say, no, we need catechisms for the children. That was he was the first person to start thinking that way. And so you had, a kid can't understand, a 6-year-old can't understand how God is independent and has all power that is the source of himself. I mean, how do you explain that to him? You can't explain it. But what you can say is, hey, who made you? And the catechism, well, God made me. Well, what else did God make? God made all things. And so these catechisms help them, because once they start thinking about the catechism that they memorize, they're like, well, God made me. He made all things. Well, who made God? Well, nobody made God. You're like, whoa, that must be a really amazing God. I have no idea what that means yet, but I do know that. So by the time, I have reached 10 or 11 years old, maybe I can start exploring a how question. Well, how is it that nothing made God? What is that about? And where do we find out, more about, what we can know for sure about God? Is there anything physically on this earth that would have a higher, could tell us something more about God, or is the Bible the highest place? And those kind of questions start appealing to 10-year-olds. But by the time they're 16, they've learned this pattern. So it's not that you take this pattern and just slap it on a 6-year-old, but you start looking at when is my kid ready for the how questions? When is my kid ready for the where questions? And you start asking those kind of questions, because usually a teacher with 30 kids in the room has a curriculum and they just go. And if your kid ain't ready, sorry, they're moving. But as a homeschooler, you can ask these questions and figure out maybe your 6-year-old is ready for a how question, maybe a really simple how question because your 6-year-old. My 9-year-old son probably isn't ready for a how question yet. He's a boy that just wants to move all the time. And so we have to adjust for that, but we can because we're homeschoolers. And so thinking of it as how do I pace this out is a better way of thinking about it. And I think the classical system is really helpful that way.
Yeah, I get your point, and I think I see your consistency because as you were talking about that, I was thinking about, that's why he's talking about your goal. What is your goal? So what is your goal for a 6-year-old? So I can say for my younger ones, when they were littler, they're a little bit older now. My goal was a high view of scripture and a high view of God and wonder. Oh, wow. Yeah. Right. That was kind of my goal. And I'm so curious, people are going to laugh. They're like, Christy, you don't do Awana, but you do memory work and you do this. We do a Protestant catechism. Do you do that too in your homeschool?
Yes, we do. Yeah. We start, and so, my denomination is, very catechism friendly, if I can put it that way. But we use.
And what denomination would that be, Renton?
We're Presbyterian, so yeah, we worship at the feet of catechisms, shorter and longer.
Are you doing New City? Is that the one you're doing?
No, but we really like that one. I think they're getting to the age where they're getting ready for New City.
Yeah.
They're and this is our two littles are a little delayed, so we kind of deal with that. But we're still on the kids' catechism. I mean, like really simple question and answer. And this is something that I think it needs to be reiterated to your audience, because this is something that gets under my skin when it comes to how we deal with our kids as homeschoolers. We get caught up in systems and programs, and then we start dedicating ourselves to the system and the program and try and force our kid into that, which is the whole reason we took them out of schooling. Yes. In the classroom, we want them in our home because we didn't want to systematize them, if that makes sense. And so if catechisms work for you, then great, use those catechisms. If the children's catechism works all the way up until they're teenagers, use it. But adapt to the kid. Don't try and force them into a system because you like the system for your 15-year-old. And that's what I love about homeschoolers that have all this diverse curriculum. They'll buy. They might buy, BJUPress for one thing, and then maybe another, group for something else because they know their kid. Loyalty is for companies. It's not for families. Don't be loyal to anything. Be loyal to your kids and what works for them. If a particular system works really well for them, then do it. But as soon as it stops working, find something else, because this is what homeschool is all about.
Yes, absolutely. And I shout this from the rooftops too. At the core, I would say I'm a classical Charlotte Mason homeschooler, and I have found non-classical and Charlotte Mason curriculum help me to blossom in being more of those two things. Like, for example, we use BJUPress Homeschool for science, and we just do it in a way that's very classical. It's actually given me really great scaffolding for it. So please don't think that because you come out as an educational pedagogy or a certain philosophy, that means a particular program, co-op, or system. It's more of a posture. It's more of how you think about education, how you approach it. I have one last question for you, because this is a lot of us homeschool moms were insecure. Maybe we didn't start out as teachers. And when we get excited about something, we immediately think, well, what do I buy to do this? What can I buy to do this? What is your, and there are critical thinking curricula. Now, what I kind of heard you say throughout this episode is it's more of a weaving in. It's more of like conversations. Where is something like fallacy detective or critical thinking workbooks? Because here's that other piece. My background is education, and I do know about cognitive skills, lagging cognitive skills that you can grow. We used to think IQ was fixed. We now know that it is not. You can actually grow your IQ. You can work on your working memory, your long-term memory, your short-term memory. And these are all cognitive skills, right? So where would you recommend that? Do you run out and, sign your kid up for a critical thinking class? Where do you land in all of that? Because I know the insecure moms, and I was her, is like, okay, well, just tell me what to buy now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think, there is so much stuff out there, and there's good stuff.
Great stuff.
I mean, if you wanted to do a class just on logic or critical thinking, Canon Press has good stuff, Memorial Press has good stuff, Classical Academic Press has good stuff. I would caution this. Don't feel, okay, I feel convicted from this talk. I now need to have a class. Now I will go to, ChristianHomeschoolBooks.com and find something, and we will get this done. What I would do, if you haven't done anything like this yet, I would start with, how do I begin critical thinking in my science? How do I begin critical thinking in my Bible class, if I have a Bible class? How do I begin critical thinking in all my classes? What does that look like? What's the goal? How do I get them there? And once I start doing that, I think, you know what? We need more. We need more. And then maybe I do need a class that's separate, to really focus on critical thinking. Build up to it if you haven't, because my biggest fear is that someone's going to get all gung-ho, then they look at all the material that's out there. They get overwhelmed. They think, oh, we can't do this. Then you feel like a failure again.
Yeah.
When you cannot put your faith in curriculum or a process. You have to put your faith in the one that said you're in charge of your kid's education. He's the one that you put your faith in. The Lord said that you are the one that is the best person for educating those kids. Now, some people defer that to a school, but you haven't. What you've done is said, I'm going to do it. That's what you got to believe. That's what qualifies you to be there, God himself. Then take a deep breath and say, let me start on these different classes. If I can get, start getting to that goal. And then what else do I need? We're just, what are all these terms? I need something that will help me with terms. And so then you move to that. Because my biggest complaint, out in academia that really made me upset was that if you went to college, you had to take psychology. Everyone took a psychology course, no matter what your major was. It was part of the core curriculum. And so everyone was taking psychology. Now, if you wanted to learn how to think, well, then that's an elective. If you decide you want to think, you can take a logic course. But that's not the way we started out. I mean, there was logic courses back in the day. Logic was all the way from elementary to high school. And, back in the Middle Ages, logic was part of the core curriculum of learning at all. Whatever you majored in, whatever you got your degree in, you were taking logic. It was only when America decided that they were going to care more about how they feel than how they think that we really shifted this. So I say all that to say, you start going through your classes and start really having a goal for thinking and having that goal of how do I get my kid from belief to that pole, that truth. And once we start succeeding at that, maybe I really do need a class that just concentrates on thinking, because they're not going to get it if they go to college unless they want an elective. And depending on what college you go to, who knows what you're going to get. So the only person that's really going to invest in their thinking process is going to be you. And by the time they get to college, it's usually too late. You're dealing with a lot of bad habits by then. So be the person that teaches them the good habits.
I love that so much. Thought hygiene. You know, I'm a big person on emotional intelligence, and I talk a lot about thought hygiene. And this is just another context of it. Taking care of our thought life, both, I like to talk about it emotionally, but this is also on a more, critical thinking aspect, which is so valuable. Hey, Renton, I know you're going to teach a masterclass in Thrive, and I'm so excited because we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how to do all of this. So excited. Check out Thrive Homeschool Community. If you need to build your homeschooling skills, you need support. We have parent coaching in there. We have the 8-step homeschool success framework. We also have the fail-safe homeschool setup. And also it's a place where you can build community. Renton, though, where can my audience find you?
Well, you can find me at rentonrathbun.com. That's Renton Rathbun. It's not burn. Don't burn the bun, I always say. But find me on rentonrathbun.com. I have a podcast called The Renton Rathbun Show where we discuss worldviews that are coming against the family and how to respond to those in an appropriate way to help your kids become a generation that knows the Lord. And so if you're interested in that, the Renton Rathbun Show is on all your favorite podcast platforms, but you can especially find it on rentonrathbun.com.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for coming on today. I am leaving more confused, which is probably the point. Thanks for coming on.
My heart